Tim Schultz and his people have been both financially and personally generous over the number of years. So, on behalf of the event, we'd like to present the company with a small thank you.
Wow, thank you. Very nice.
We either get to keep it or give it to Tim. I'll leave that to your decision.
As I'm the ethics director, I'll probably get a turn again.
I guess so.
Oh, yeah.
But Raytheon has been with us very early on. Raytheon is a Massachusetts company, so we're really thrilled to be in the company's backyard. And so thank you again. Thanks for... And Ken, you can start whenever you want.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I've covered all the... Oh, you're discouraged from reading your part. I think you know that already.
Sure.
Notes are fine, but you don't want to just read. And the philosophical technical terminology, the whole idea is making this accessible to a business audience. And while it pains me as a philosopher not to be able to use deontology and teleology, I understand the nature of this rule. And the same basis for the religious traditions. I mean, those are perfectly legitimate. We're not anti-religion here, but we want your appeal to go to an audience that may not include a faith tradition.
Sure.
All right. Do you have any questions before we start?
No? Why don't we get going here?
We're starting late, but you're still going to get your time.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so just to set the stage a little bit, we're from HKUST MBA program, and here we are representing human resource consultants working with Google, whom you are all familiar with, and this is our recommendation to them. The judge's role. Sorry. Okay, the judge's role is you are the head of human resources at Google, and we are consultants, and you've come here to tell us, and you're in a bit of crisis mode with regard to some recent news over the past couple years, and you're looking for guidance on how to increase your diversity within your company.
We're part of management, not the board.
Sorry. Those in charge of making these kind of decisions. So, without further ado, let's get started. Good morning. So what we're here to talk about today is how to improve diversity at Google. And now, we all know diversity is an issue that almost every company in the world cares about, or ostensibly cares about. It's been an issue for a long time, and it's something that every company says they're doing a lot about, but the effects can be varied. And Google and Silicon Valley as a whole has really been under fire a lot in recent years for their lack of ability to foster diversity within their companies from both a recruiting and a retention point of view. We're seeing that the vast majority of employees at Google and their competitors are white and Asian males, and this is not only represented, and this isn't necessarily anybody's fault. There are tons of social, cultural, historical reasons that this has come to be. There are a lot fewer underrepresented minorities and women present in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics undergraduate programs. So there's limited things that companies are able to do about it. However, one of the Google has taken to some rather unethical ways to address this problem. And so what we're here to talk about is how we can grow diversity within Google in a way that's ethical, legally permissible, and is going to create good financial results for the company. So, just to give you a preview of what we're going to talk about today. So we all know, again, diversity among genders and underrepresented minorities is a major problem in Google and Silicon Valley as a whole, due to a number of reasons, historical and societal, in today's world. So, we believe that the solution to this problem is threefold. First, recruiting. We want to know how to find and get qualified women and underrepresented minority candidates to come work at Google. Second is retention. How do we not only recruit a diverse pool of candidates to Google, but grow them and include them in the conversation at Google in a way that's both conducive to them growing as employees and the company benefiting from the diversity of perspectives that they bring to the table. And finally, we want to reform Google's community outreach initiative, so part of their corporate social responsibility initiatives aimed at fostering education in STEM among women or girls and underrepresented minorities in the U.S. community. So sort of trying to pave a foundation for a future where there's a lot more of these people coming through the education system interested in computer science naturally. So what is the impact of this going to be? We believe that 2,000 plus undergraduate applications from underrepresented minorities and women will come every year due to these initiatives. There will be a 5 to 10% decrease in attrition rate among these groups, and we can't put a number on what the outreach initiatives are going to do, but we believe if Google and other companies in the space follow suit, that we'll see an increase in applicants naturally in the future. So Amit is going to talk to you a bit about the background and problem. There you go.
So after a 20-hour journey from Hong Kong to Silicon Valley, after we landed, I noticed something strange. 3 out of 10 people look like me or this handsome gentleman here. 6 look like this handsome gentleman here. Is that representative of US? No, right? So we looked for some numbers and we noticed that women only represent 31% in Google. And as you can see, it gets more skewed in technology and leadership roles. If that's not enough, we analyzed 5-year trends in Google's employee demographics and noticed that all underrepresented minorities, the percentage of payroll is either going down or has been stagnant. We think that this is a big issue for Google. As being an integral part of the US economy, they should actually represent the demographics of the country. So again, some more numbers. We have also benchmarked Google's against other technology companies like Facebook and Apple. And as you can see, the problem is not only at Google. Facebook and Apple also have the same issue, with around 1/3 of the workforce being women, which is very low compared to the 51% in the US. This is also the ethnic composition, which you can see clearly that Asians and Caucasians occupy a large portion of the workforce in those technology companies. Then the previous numbers were more at the overall level. So if you look at the top level, there are 31 senior executives at Google. Can you guess how many of them are women? 4. Can you guess how many of them are non-Asian and non-Caucasian? 1. 1 out of 31, that's right. And we have benchmarked these numbers against other Fortune 500 companies and noticed that even they have a similar issue, but it's not as bad as Google. So Google starts trying to change the tide, and it starts taking some drastic measures. And what happens? We see articles like this. If you want to change the tide and stop hiring white and Asian men, you will face lawsuits. And once you face lawsuits, your shareholders will be angry, and your executive compensation or even your jobs may be at risk. So this is an article from Wall Street Journal, and this is another one from Bloomberg.
Sure. So just to go back a little bit to this, so these are sort of the events I was speaking of before that are sort of the negative backlash that Google has faced over this. So in the case on the left, so YouTube, which is a division of Google, they have a lawsuit right now because one of their former hiring managers claims, as far as we know, truthfully, that their division actually sent out a memo saying you cannot hire any Asian and white men for programming roles. And obviously, while that does seek to encourage diversity, it's problematic from a legal and, in our point of view, ethical point of view. And in this side, Google has, it's a different division of Google, but I believe in the same case, they had another person who received a similar memo and saying that they should be hired, just more or less discriminating in hiring. And only last year, Google had there was a big story that happened because Google fired somebody who was I believe a white man who created a long memo sort of criticizing their diversity initiatives and their hiring practices. And the fact that this guy was hired for, he had some controversial opinions that we don't necessarily condone, but the fact that he was fired for this created a bit of a controversy in any case. So, we want to start out by saying that we believe that having a diverse workforce is an ethical imperative for any corporation in today's world. And going back to what you said before, we don't want to bring this from a pure philosophical perspective or a religious perspective or anything like that. But we do believe that most people in today's world who we could consider ethical leaders or people we look to for this sort of guidance do kind of agree with this principle here, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So that's from the UN's Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And we think diversity is important because it helps correct societal injustices that have led to problems where that's not necessarily true. The U.S. is a capitalist country where companies like Google are the force behind the economy, the force behind nearly every person's lives. And they, as such, have the responsibility to ensure that this principle is upheld within our society. As you can see over here, more about the imbalance. We can see that there's a lot of that progress has probably been made from years ago, but there's still a large gap in just simply how much people earn for doing the same roles based on their race, ethnicity, and gender. We also believe that diversity is good for business, and this is probably the more practically important part for today's presentation. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that diversity creates better financial results for companies. In fact, this report from McKinsey claims that there's a linear relationship between ethnic and racial diversity and better financial performance. And we think that a company that's global, like Google, who serves a global audience, who serves a diverse set of customers, they're going to need a diverse perspective in their product development and their customer service and any customer-centric role in order to make their products something that the whole world can embrace. And we also believe that this is the way that the country's attitudes are heading in, is that any company is going to have to be able to demonstrate real diversity and commitment to that in order for society to really support them as a company. So now Wiziani will talk about how misguided diversity initiatives can backfire.
While diversity is good for companies, sometimes it can be a challenge to create a good, appropriate diversity initiative. So the common pitfall that companies fall into is focusing too much on just the recruitment. So it becomes one of those only checklists in the HR scorecard. When this happens, it's bad for the minorities and also for the people in the company. For example, imagine you are a minority group and you are hired in a company, and you walk your first day, and then you see everybody is not including you in every conversation. You're different, and not naturally with this situation, people will feel undervalued. So this can lead to also performance issue. And in terms of diversity initiative, most people talk about minorities, but what about the non-minorities? How would they feel? So this article I found on Harvard Business Review actually say that not misguided diversity initiative can lead to the non-minorities feeling threatened. So I found a research saying that basically if there's two groups of white male going into interview, and then one group were told that this company has a very heavy diversity initiative, and the other group was not told anything about diversity initiative. And it was quite interesting. The result was the first group performed worse. So they are more stressful, they're more threatened, they feel like maybe the company don't want to hire them because of the diversity issue. So this is something that I found pretty interesting. And all these can lead to employee insecurity which will lead eventually to performance issue.
So, having heard the problem, the advantages, and also some of the disadvantages of hiring in diversity, here comes our recommendation. So our recommendations are based on 3 pillars. Like we said earlier, recruitment, retention, and also we understand there's no overnight changes. So a long-term cooperation outreach into the community. How do we foster our future talent pools? Just to give you a quick overview of the recruiting strategy, we noticed that Google do tend to hire students from certain areas or certain range of schools, mainly dependent on the ranking of those schools. However, we also understand that it's not always true that students in those schools are in there solely for academic merits. Therefore, why don't we reach out broader to more areas, to more schools with higher number of ethnical minorities, to try to find the talents that we're looking for. Retention. Once we hire these new talents, how do we make them feel comfortable to work in such great company? How do we make the existing employees feel the sense of inclusion? How do we make people just feel that they're all working under one equal space? What's more, our corporation outreach. So how do we sow the seeds for the future? Again, we understand that there's no overnight changes, and also we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. But what can we do better? How can we use the resource more efficiently? And how do we make a longer lasting impact?
So let's talk first about the first pillar of our plan, recruiting. So let's get the legal stuff out of the way first. What you can't do, use race, gender, ethnicity in hiring evaluations. You can't hire anybody based on this. You can't fire anybody based on this. It's off limits in terms of a qualitative justification for hiring somebody. You can't, and likewise, you can't set quotas for diversity because that would entail doing the former. What you can do is target schools where minorities, underrepresented minorities are more likely to be present, and encourage women and minorities to apply through special initiatives specifically targeted at them. So we took a look at where Google is hiring people from now, and what we're going to focus on here is specifically entry-level programming and engineering roles. So this is computer science graduates from universities across the country. This is sort of the core of Google's competitive advantage and the most sort of sought after and prestigious and important jobs they have in the company. So, of course, programming aptitude is going to be the main selection criteria. Currently, Googliness, which is sort of their cultural fit sort of term, is something that's very important to them. But we also believe that they have a strong preference from graduates of top schools. Now, this is not something that Google states publicly, but there's a lot of evidence from what quantitative research can be done, as well as a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that it's really true. That Google, in fact, over 30% of their employees come from the top 10 according to Forbes U.S. schools. And of course, Google is a huge organization where a lot of the functions are going to be not necessarily as prestigious or intellectually demanding. So we have to assume that in lack of evidence, it's fair to assume that in these sought-after core engineering roles, this number is even higher for that. So they do have diversity goals. They say the selection process is entirely merit-based, but off record, they're known to have internal diversity quotas, which we mentioned before is problematic. So how do we correct this issue? And it's important to note that these are the school. We believe that the school choice of their recruiting is key here. So these are the top 4 schools from what some research can tell that Google hires from. So Stanford, Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, top engineering schools in the country. We can actually see that Stanford and MIT are pretty strong as far as U.S. universities go with diversity. But many of the other ones they recruit with, such as the rest of the top 10 schools in the Forbes list, we found are not. And more importantly, these are schools that really there's a lot of evidence to show there are high economic barriers to entry. And a lot of the purpose of diversity initiatives is not only to simply create a number that's higher, that looks good to investors or whomever out there, but it's really to create an economically better future for groups which have historically been economically disadvantaged. And if you're hiring people from schools that have very little in the way of economic diversity, and that means they're mostly well-to-do people going to these schools, you're not going to really be able to achieve that end. So we think that the key here is to look at more diverse, local, less prestigious, but promising colleges and universities. And for the recruiting portion, we're really going to focus on ethnic minorities rather than women here, because by and large, the problem is less egregious in terms of diversity at Google between minorities than women. And most colleges are much more balanced in terms of male and female than they are in terms of ethnic minorities. So we're not really sure. We don't believe that the recruiting efforts are going, in terms of selecting new target schools, can significantly influence our female applicants that much. But for example, here are some examples of schools we could target. So UTEP, virtually all of their undergraduates are Hispanics. It's been rated the top model institution for Hispanic STEM education. Florida International University, another majority Hispanic school, engineering program is ranked. It may not be MIT or Stanford, but there's reason to believe it could produce strong candidates as well. North Carolina A&T, this is a historically black college, also top historically black college for computer science graduates in the country. And Howard University, it's a well-known, probably the most prestigious of the historically black colleges, also a place that Google has worked with in the past, but we believe these schools should be moved to the front line of recruiting initiatives. So to get the same level of resources and effort put into the recruiting initiatives there as they would their top target schools. And the other point here is that while these may not be the best schools, we know that the best students don't necessarily come from the best schools. And this isn't about saying, oh, we have to hire people from these schools, but by expanding the pool of potential applicants significantly, we can increase the chances that qualified underrepresented minorities will be applying to our roles at Google. Another part of the recruiting initiative is to hold recruiting events specifically for minorities and women. Now this is legally permissible because it's not a hiring decision. It's simply an event. So we could have, for example, a women's only recruiting event, a Hispanic, black only recruiting event. This is very common for MBA programs in the world, but we rarely see it in terms of corporate recruiting. And we believe that by bringing these groups into these recruiting events, they'll get the sense that Google is a more inclusive place that they would like to work and grow as an employee. So now we'll talk about the retention initiatives.
So after hiring these people, we need to also retain them. Now, let's look at what Google currently do. So as we know, Google has been very famous for their fun sort of work environment with the beanbags, with the bicycles and game rooms. That's one of their way of promoting their retention and also innovation. But in terms of diversity, they are starting to have a specific diversity team. So 700 Google employees now focus 20% of their time to diversity issue. And also they are doing workshop like unconscious bias, and they also have some of those employee resource group like a woman at Google, Iranian Googlers, and Gigglers, and some other things. And the other thing that I want to highlight is the promotion opportunity. So Google has been known for promoting people with great ideas, but does that really work? Does people with great ideas have managerial skills, have what it takes to be a leader? So that's something that we also want to focus on. So based on those, we think Google should enhance its inclusion portfolio by having, it needs to start from day one. So for example, like onboarding activities like shuffled lunches. So for example, I come day one, I'm an Asian woman. I would be paired with a person who is non-Asian woman. So for example, like African American guy or something like that. So it kind of helped me to be more included in the team and also having learned about other culture. So that helps with cultural sensitivity within the organization. And Google can also do more of a gamification, which is currently, especially with millennials, it's currently very popular. And Google should also include a senior management mentorship program. So as we know, most of the, like Alec mentioned earlier, most of the senior management in Google is Asian or Caucasian male. So that needs to change, and Google wants that to change to promote more and more diversity, and the mentorship can help with that. And also having more than one person one person from each demographic in a group can help people feel less tokenized. And the other important thing is about the promotion opportunity. So as we see here in the chart, a diverse team, when managed well, it's very effective. But when it's not managed well, it's actually worse than homogeneous team. So if Google wants to have a diverse team, it needs to have good managers. And how to have that? I think Google should include an inclusive leadership criteria as their promotion to leadership position. So this inclusive leadership can include 7 criteria, which one of them is cultural intelligence.
Okay, thank you. So let's quickly move on to CSR since we haven't have the most of the time. So with more Googlers having more time available, these are the byproducts that, I wouldn't say byproduct, but these are some of the current initiatives that have been launched out to different minority groups. However, these are all running in silos because, well, one person will have a new idea, the other one will have a different idea, and they are all quite technically specific. So what we want to propose is diversity lab. So with everything grouped together, then we'll promote the STEM subjects, encourage girls into engineering, and more diverse groups into being more interested in the subject and hence become future talents. So obviously we have the students, and more novel idea in here is that we'll also include the management and current Googlers going into it as a part of their inclusion training as well. Not only they have the skills to offer, they can utilize current digital academy in Google, bringing or exchange of locations, so students into Google into schools. Also, more importantly, going into what influence what they learn in their syllabus, and also providing career advices to foster the future talent pool. So that said, the impact. So we have done some quick calculations on what might that cost to the company, and also some of the benefits that it will provide to us. So I'd like to just quickly wrap this up now. So we identified the problems in the industry, and also more specifically into Google, and also today we laid out some of the problems and also our solutions on how to address them in 3 different pillars: recruitment, retention, and also how to foster the future talent for outreach. So I hope you enjoyed our presentations, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. You've got 38 more seconds. So, do you want to begin?
Sure. You spoke a lot about expanding the schools that you would recruit from in terms of recruiting. You spoke about changing the model for retention. You gave the example about the shuffling the lunches and whatever. And I'm wondering what you would do to address the backlash, right? So generally when there's more emphasis on diversity hiring and retention, right, there's a corresponding backlash where employees, white male employees or the majority of employees, begin to believe that the standards are being changed, or that there's a different standard for minorities or for women. So how would you address the concerns of, in Google's case, the white men and the Asian men, as you bring on board and recruit and try to retain minorities and women?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to address that, Google is first and foremost dedicated to hiring the people with the most aptitude for programming in their jobs. I don't think, we're not suggesting at all that they should reduce their standards in hiring. And I believe that, the people who are currently working at Google, who are white and Asian male, they are smart people. We hire them you hire them because they're smart people. And I think what we believe, based on kind of our experience with speaking with people at Google and other companies sort of where there's a similar environment of engineers are going to respect the talents of other engineers when it's demonstrated to them. So I think as long as we are hiring people that are still high caliber, not giving people any kind of handicap, then it's going to be well received. But to your point, of course, people will form their own opinions about these things, and I don't have a perfect answer for what can be done about that.
To add on to that, I guess it's very important also to create some sort of psychological safety to these non-minorities, So maybe openly saying what Wilson is saying, we still hire the best people, not just for diversity. That is one of the things that you can do. And also make them feel included. For example, like they also is involved in the interview part in some way. So in a way, they're also choosing their team. So that's sort of the things that I can think of.
I was struck by the point you made it earlier on that Google is a global company. It's not just an American company. And is it true that we, as human resources managers at Google, have access to a lot of diversity if the company is everywhere? One would think that diversity wouldn't be a problem unless the same pattern that exists in Silicon Valley exists in every other location. Is that what you're claiming? Or, in other words, Google in Germany might have a different demographic distribution than Google in Brazil and so on. I didn't hear anything in your presentation that would help me deal with that, unless it's homogeneously a problem everywhere.
So we're focusing on the U.S. operation because that's where the vast majority of our product development takes place. So most of Google's other offices in other countries are not necessarily engineers and product guys, but they're more support and that sort of thing. You know, that said, we do believe it's a worldwide issue that women in particular are not as drawn to this sort of role as men for a lot of historical and societal reasons. Of course, the minority composition of other countries is going to be different. Of course, it's not certain groups will be represented more heavily in Google's other offices. So what we're really focusing on is their mothership in California there.
And my only point here is that we as human resources leaders might have pockets of potential solutions out there if we look that we could use here. But I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I mean...
I understand your point about the engineering being concentrated
Sure.
in California.
Now I understand your point. So our belief is, and kind of going back to what I said before about diversity being an ethical imperative, is that the reason we don't want, Google doesn't want diversity just for the sake of diversity, and corporations shouldn't pursue diversity just for the sake of diversity. The point is to economically balance the scales in, I believe if you're an American company in this country, which have been historically imbalanced, if we hire black Africans, or we hire people, Hispanic people from Brazil and Latin America to come to Google, does that help the black and Hispanic community in America? I don't think it does.
You couldn't get a visa anyway these days. I'm very impressed by the logical progression of your arguments. Very helpful to us as the senior HR team in thinking about how we talk to senior management who have to, after all, allocate the resources and our time and the time of other employees. So I'd like to ask you to develop a little bit further several of the things that you talked about and that our time constraints didn't necessarily allow for, but this is a good time perhaps to get into that a little bit further. In talking about the initiatives that you recommended, you had a number of ideas that struck me as quite interesting. I'd like to know more about how you think we could carry them out. You You talked about the diversity lab, which I thought was a way of integrating all of the siloed diversity initiatives plus some of the new things that you're talking about, so that it more broadly affected the company's actions in the recruitment, retention, support, coaching areas, and also went deeper, so that it went down to how people get along on small teams in the workplace and vie for promotions and get considered and all that. Could you say a little bit more about how you think that would work and how we would get there and what resistance? You did a real good job in some other areas talking about the cost of action, the cost of inaction, where you thought there'd be backlashes and resistance. My colleague here asked about backlash. You had some good responses. So if you could talk about that integration of those pieces, and it seemed to me that it was very much connected to, but you didn't have that much time to talk about it, the 7 characteristics of leadership, and it seemed to me you were aiming at describing an accountability of leadership for participating in those functions, which obviously is needed, or else those just become slogans. So if you go deeper into the way you see the pieces of your initiative fitting together, where the accountabilities are, and which aspects seem to you to be have the highest strategic leverage. Just a little deeper on those things.
Yeah. So based on this chart here, so maybe can I start with commitment and also collaborations?
Let me just say
Right,
this.
okay.
No, I mean, you're going in a great direction.
Yeah.
But I think for our task, what we do next, if you could focus on not necessarily describing what these are,
Right.
as to how you're going to get this into the system and into measurements. Because you talked a lot about metrics at the beginning that made the issues very persuasive, the challenges persuasive, and some of the opportunities persuasive. Could you, as you talk about this, extend your sense of how we measure people's performance,
Right.
so that they will be paying attention to the things, so that our metrics improve?
So your question is, how will we implement our proposed strategies? Is it? So first of all, in terms of the key performance indicators, of course, we can look at the change in demographics of a headcount to see if the initiatives that we are recommending is taking impact. Again, since it's a long-term strategy for especially
That's the macro goal.
yeah.
That's right.
So, and that was great. You laid that right out at the beginning, and that's great to have a metric. We all would agree. But then you talked about some programs and these criteria for managers as part of the program. How will all of that work? How does this connect to the diversity lab? How does this connect to promotional stuff? And connect some of those things together, because I couldn't quite figure out what I was now going to go have to recommend, even
Right,
though there was
okay.
a lot of really attractive possibilities here.
So in a very short, like you said earlier, we're trying to change the macro view, but when it comes to more in defined details, of course, we can devote a number of our staff and managers, like we said earlier, the amount of time available per week, per month to go into these colleges, and also we can use some of the utilization rate, because the current digital academy is an online tool. However, if we go in to conduct the academy in person, face to face, so currently digital academy is something that you can go online, you can register, and also people like me and you can also register as a certified trainer. However, what we're trying to do is to include our actual Googlers, being these trainers, trying to go in and teach these subjects. So of course we can measure the number of schools that has been visited. Have we really touched on frequently the target schools that we mentioned earlier? And also, these are the impacts that we can get. We can measure quite quickly. Have we successfully influenced enough syllabus in the schools? Let's say in the next academic year, have we successfully infused some of these programs that we have mentioned earlier into their academic syllabus? And also things like the career advice session, how many of them and what is the coverage of the students in each of the college have we touched on? So these are some of the very obvious area that we can measure. And also, because we are trying to encourage a face-to-face, a lot of the things that, Google tried to take away from us doing, but instead we're coming back in to talk to these future talents, thinking, just keep measuring how likely they are to consider this as their future career. So
This is very helpful. So what I think you're describing to us is, here's what we think we need to do differently in each of these areas. And now what you started to talk about is the possibility for measuring at this more micro level whether we're doing the things within these and perhaps other categories that could lead to the macro goals.
That's right.
And then you can go back and see which ones correlate.
That's true. But another thing I wanted to just add is that while I'm a numbers guy, I'm a finance guy, I like to see results, but the legal implications of assigning numerical goals and quotas and things to this sort of programs get very problematic, because you can say that, management has a goal of improving diversity by XYZ%, they're going to have an incentive in that case to discriminate, which is, of course, ethically problematic. So, unfortunately, a lot of the times, going beyond simply encouragement, outreach, and getting the name of Google out there to the people we're trying to recruit, the people we're trying to retain, is the direction we have to go in.
Yeah, I'll just say that I totally agree with the issue and the balance and the concern. But as you described, the things at least that you chose to highlight in responding, you can count campus visits, you can count syllabi affected, you can count how many outside the top 10. And I think a subsidiary issue, which we can talk about later on, if you think about the list of universities, you made some assertions about what you would find at those universities. I'd be interested in, and you would, I'm sure, be interested in, we would like to hire you further to pay you a lot of money to do some more before we send a lot of people out to these universities. Do we really think that the school that's ranked 170th is going to yield us something? And it could be the answer is yes, but we could know that. We can know some things ahead of time about their performance on standardized tests, and we can know later about their performance in our company. So there seems to be that what you're talking about here is a lot of things that you can measure which are not problematic and which are in fact merit-based or unrelated to merit. It's related to the population of schools and such that we see. So it's still continuing to be impressive.
Did you want to? I have a question I want to slip in, but we've got 4 minutes left.
Prerogative of the chair.
No.
Yeah.
My job is to engage with the other judges.
So you started off talking about sort of the ethical reasons, why Google should have a commitment to diversity. And I'm wondering what kind of guidance you would give us as HR when we're dealing with our HR generalists who are interacting with managers and coaching them day to day and evaluating their performance. How do you think that we as HR professionals can get buy-in from our managers and our supervisors who are hiring everybody from engineers to program managers? How do you suggest that we get buy-in for them regarding the value and the ethical nature of diversity? What do you suggest that we present it?
So when you talk with your senior management, right, they will care a lot about the shareholders' returns, right? So I think there's academic research which shows that diverse teams work well, diverse teams give better financial returns. And secondly, Google is one of the few companies that will release its demographic data publicly, which can be scrutinized by the regulators, which can be scrutinized by the president. And so since this data is public, to look good in the eyes of the shareholders and the investment community, the data can't be that skewed towards two particular groups of people. So emphasizing the financial returns and public goodwill that they can generate by taking initiatives, we believe that you can obtain the buy-ins from your management.
I also think you could also frame it another way to some people that going back to what I talked to before about social license to operate, that not doing anything about this could be a significant crisis for Google as the country becomes more conscious of this diversity initiative. Obviously, we're at a point over the last few years. I mean, it's transformed a lot just in the last few years, where so many women's and racial issues are coming to the forefront of the general discourse in this country, and explaining to people that the company has to transform as a whole in order to not be a villain. For example, the way Wall Street was in the financial crisis. That I think that's a sort of a call to action that people can appreciate at all levels.
We're almost out of time. I want to suggest that your solutions, as clear as they are, from my point of view as an HR director, are just not radical enough. I think they need to be more aggressive, and you've inspired me to think of Google University. Grow our own. I mean, if you can play the game of diversity metrics on different colleges and feeder institutions, but if you know what you want, why not make it happen? General Motors, for many years, had General Motors Institute in Detroit. It was a first-class engineering school. And they picked the cream right off the top of the graduates of that school, because they put the curriculum into the school with General Motors in mind, not just the rest of the world. Hush. So, is there something wrong with that idea? Maybe I wanted to be radical and maybe I'm foolish, imprudent. Tell me what you think.
That's a great idea. I wish I had thought of it.
I think the GM Institute was a contemporary solution, was a contemporary version of the university, the GM University.
Yeah.
With Diversity Lab, everything is based online, or we can, in terms of this will be scalable. So if we want to expand this, there are possibilities. We can expand it to, let's say, other countries that we operate. Japan, where diversity is definitely a lot more skewed to one side in comparison to what we have. Something scalable that can happen, and this is our platform. And we understand that this is not built in one day. There's no overnight changes, like I said before. So step by step, and this is our platform.
So I would, just to add to what he was saying, I would question though whether, if let's say we went with Google University, it's a full undergraduate school to hire engineers, bring them to Google hopefully. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility for what Google wants to do in the future. I think that they want to do everything, but would that really solve the problem that the top universities in the country are facing also? The reason that MIT and Harvard are not hiring as many minorities and women is not because of something fundamental regarding their school. They want diversity too, just as much as Google does. The reason is these schools are incredibly expensive. By and large, these underrepresented minorities we're talking about come from less means than the white and Asian people who are coming to these universities. Is that really going to solve the fact that they may not be able to afford to come to Google University? They won't get the scholarships. They don't want to go so far away from, they don't want to go as far from their families to attend university, which is the reason many minorities don't. And does it really solve the problem of that we still have where women are, societally discouraged from pursuing STEM? It's not clear that that would, I think, we could have another Harvard, but would that really make Google a more diverse place? I'm not sure.
Well, I agree with my colleagues. We got to pay you more. You've gotten us agitated. And with that, we're going to step out of our roles as HR people and simply comment on your presentation, ways to improve it, ways to praise and salute it, all of that. So, we've got 10 minutes to do that.
Okay.
I was just going to put us back to a couple of pages.
I thought the presentation and the use of the slides was very good. My one suggestion for improvement would be to get a little more dynamism into the mix. I mean, there's 4 of you, and we know we need to hear from all 4 of you. But the risk is that you're each going to do your part, and it's going to get kind of flat. And there might be some ways to put a little, dare I say, diversity into the presentations of each of you, so that those who are listening stay attentive, because there's another person speaking, but it's not the same voice anymore. It's another angle. And I don't know how in the micro to engineer that, if you will, but the flatness, at least from my point of view, didn't serve your purpose. So I would put a little more energy and maybe differences of different presentations. But energy might be the better word.
Okay. Get more sleep before.
Colleagues?
I thought that you did a really good job answering the questions. That's kind of the hardest part in any kind of oral presentation, is trying to think about what you're being asked and come up with an answer and do all of that calculation in your head on the fly. So I thought that particularly the questions that we asked were kind of complicated, and you were able to tag team and address a number of different issues. In terms of your presentation, we're all used to death by PowerPoint. I personally am a real big fan of the question that you're trying to answer being on the screen, so that the listener can sift through what you're saying and apply it to what you're trying to answer. So when you're talking about retention, like, just sort of what's the question that you're trying to, or the issue that you're trying to answer? Like, how do we retain more? And then it's easier to focus on the different points that you're about.
I thought that you really did an excellent job. I think these comments are really helpful on refinement. But in general, for the IBEC environment and the pressures and the goals, I thought, for example, executive summary early, very precise metrics early. That could be really boring. It wasn't boring. You picked good stuff to talk about. You talked about it well. You had good looking slides. Not exclusively, but for example, when you said, 6 people look like this guy, 4 people look like this guy, nobody looks like her, and nobody looks like these other people who aren't hardly represented at all. I thought things like that were extremely effective, and that the strength of the metrics is very appealing to senior corporate people, because this is the language that they have to speak. Whether they believe it or don't believe it, whether they share your societal goals, which I thought you articulated quite well, and you didn't overdo that. It's really common for that to be overdone in presentations like this, not just in IBEC, but in organizations. It's much more persuasive to talk about the numbers, our relative performance relative to competition, business risks, downside risks to business performance, to public perceptions for large companies that are heavily exposed to that. So I thought you were really good on that, and overall very good. So my comments about if you did X, it would have been better are, I would say, modest, important but modest improvements. And others could disagree about whether these would improve it or be the best things to do. But some ideas to consider. Because you were really strong on the metrics at the beginning, that's a good thing to stay strong on all the way through. And that's why I asked you later, so what are you going to measure? And I think you gave me a pretty good response. But that would have been good to have in and kind of continue that. And I thought that the place where I thought you had the most possibility, but also perhaps the most weakness, and easy to fix, because in other places you showed the perception and the ability to assess and present on the same kinds of things. The centerpiece was we're going to go to these other schools, and you asserted that we could get people that are just as good. So if I'm a senior HR person and I have to go to senior management and the really tough CFO types and say, give me some money for this, or we need to reorganize and move some people around, or get more volunteer time for these things. If you assert that these 4 or 40 schools like that are going to be good, I'm going to say, well, what are you smoking? And how do you know that? You have all these really good numbers about this other stuff. Give me some numbers about these schools. Well, you're Google. You ought to be really good at, metrics, and you can run them through a million kinds of programs and all this sort of stuff. You could probably go to any number of rankings and find public universities, which for all the reasons that you so clearly articulated that lots of recruiters don't realize, people who don't have the means, they're going to go to a community college for 2 years and pray they get some scholarship money to go to a pretty good state university. Many of which, as you said, inserted this, are really good, and good at the things that you need that could be augmented by Google University, or McDonald's was famous for Hamburger University, which is in some ways the most ridiculous, but also among the most successful. That I mean, not that you had time and everything, but if you were really making this presentation, you could go and really get some data about that. So then I, as the HR person, going upstairs to talk to the other people and to the mean, nasty CFO, I would say, you know what, we've got numbers that show, the bottom 2/3 of MIT, Stanford, and the other hotshot schools you put up are not better than the top third of the people at these 100 schools. Why aren't we there? And then I can say, aren't we smart? We're going to meet diversity goals, we're going to get people that are just as good, and I can prove it to you. That would have knocked all the dominoes down in a row. Oh, let's do exactly what they say, because they just proved that I don't have any business risk, and I'm going to look like a really, socially conscious company, and we're going to have great people, and they are going to be the rainbow spectrum. And so it seemed to me your instincts were exactly right. And if you carried through your metrics perspective and then said, this is how we're going to manage it, we'd say, we're going to throw money at this company. Because they really gave us an insight, and they gave us a winning, marketable strategy that people inside this company are going to feel great about, and then we avoid the backlash problem, or at least we have high potential. Because it really comes down to, this, we were talking about support in many ways, it comes down to, can we make everybody that we hire be successful? Because that meets all the goals. And you were on a path to that, and so these are kind of modest ideas for how you can sharpen that up. I thought this was extremely good, and I'll differ with my colleague here just one little bit. I thought that the switching that you did, I tracked the time, and basically every 2 or 3 minutes you went to a different person. That's what all the network news shows.
Look at this, we've got that.
You know, they get these panels, and right, and so we watch that, but we don't watch it when it's the same person talking for even 6 minutes. So I thought you were very good at passing that around. It kept, it appealed to the way I listen. I can say that anyway. And you obviously planned that and were thoughtful about it.
Double to your copy.
Thought about who we're talking about. So I thought you were pretty terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
We have about 30 seconds left. This has been a good, energetic session. Tomorrow you're going to be doing the 10-minute and 90-second.
Yep.
Good luck on the 90-second. But the 10-minute one is supposed to focus on the ethical dimensions of this. And if I heard you correctly, the core ethical argument here came out of that principle in the Universal Declaration of equality. And it went to